My name is Marcus Chen. I'm 31 years old, and 3 weeks ago, I got a phone call that made my father cry for the first time since I was a child. He called to say he was sorry. He called to say my parents were wrong. He called to say the vet degree they told me was a waste of time had just changed our entire family's future. But that conversation didn't start 3 weeks ago. It started 18 years earlier in a kitchen in suburban California, where my mother sat across from me at the dinner table and asked me what I was planning to do with my life after high school. I told her the truth. I wanted to be a veterinarian. I wanted to work with animals, open my own practice, maybe specialize in exotic animals. I remember the look on her face. Not anger exactly. Something worse. Disappointment mixed with pity. Like I just told her I wanted to become a professional gambler. My father, who was usually quiet during these conversations, set down his chopsticks and said 4 words that I've carried with me for nearly 2 decades. That's not a real career. I was 17 years old. I didn't know then what I know now, which is that those words were never really about me. They were about my parents' fears. My mother had come to America from Taiwan with a high school education. My father had worked his way up from a factory job to middle management at a logistics company. In their minds, success had a narrow definition: doctor, lawyer, engineer, investment, banker. Veterinarian was something you did if you couldn't get into medical school. It was a backup plan, not a destination. I didn't argue with them that night. I learned early in life that arguing with my parents was like arguing with a concrete wall. It just left you bruised. Instead, I applied to UC Davis in secret. I got a full scholarship, merit-based. I showed them the acceptance letter on a Tuesday evening, and my mother didn't speak to me for 3 days. My father said he would pay for the tuition, but only as a loan that I would need to repay. He said this was to teach me responsibility. What it actually taught me was that even when I succeeded, it would be held against me like a debt. I went to Davis anyway. 4 years of animal science. Late nights studying parasitology and pharmacology. Weekends working at the campus veterinary hospital. My parents came to my graduation. They sat in the bleachers. They clapped when my name was called. Then we went to a restaurant, and my mother said, "Well, at least you finished something." That was the extent of the celebration. After Davis, I applied to vet school. I applied to 8 programs. UC Davis accepted me. Colorado State accepted me. Cornell accepted me. I chose UC Davis because I was tired of proving things, and I wanted to be close to the one person in my family who believed in me, which was my grandmother. She had raised me on stories about following your path, about being stubborn enough to build the life you wanted instead of the one people expected. My grandmother died during my 2nd year of vet school. Pancreatic cancer. 1 month from diagnosis to funeral. I remember sitting in my apartment after the service, holding a small jade pendant she'd given me years ago, and thinking that if I quit now, if I let my parents' doubts become my own, then her belief in me would die too. So I didn't quit. I finished. I graduated with distinction. I passed my boards on the first attempt. I opened a small mixed animal practice in rural Nevada, about an hour from Reno, in a building that had previously housed a failed insurance office. The rent was cheap. The space was decent. I spent my first year working 70-hour weeks, answering emergency calls at midnight, driving through snowstorms to deliver a foal or treat a dog with bloat. I made barely enough to cover expenses. My parents didn't visit the practice. When I called to tell them about my first major success, a complex surgical case where I saved a horse's life that another vet had recommended euthanizing, my father said, "That's good, Marcus. I'm glad it worked out." Then he asked about the weather and got off the phone. For years, it was like that. I built something meaningful. I helped animals and their families. I trained under specialists and learned advanced surgical techniques. I published research on equine colic in a veterinary journal. I expanded my practice to include an emergency clinic. My parents never asked about any of it. They would mention to their friends that I was a vet, the way you might mention that someone had gotten a decent job at a bank. Not with pride, with resignation. I accepted this as my reality. Some people have parents who show up. I had parents who showed up physically, but remained emotionally somewhere else, somewhere that didn't include me. Then 2 years ago, I hired a young associate veterinarian named Dr. Sarah Okonkwo. She was brilliant. She had just finished her degree and was hungry to learn. We worked well together. Within months, we started collaborating on research about preventative care protocols in mixed animal practices. Within a year, we had findings. Within 18 months, we had something bigger. A diagnostic algorithm that could predict common illnesses in livestock before clinical symptoms appeared, using a combination of behavioral monitoring and blood work patterns. It wasn't revolutionary, but it was useful. It was publishable. We submitted it to the Journal of the American Veterinary Medical Association. We were rejected twice. The third time, we got acceptance. The paper came out in March. Within weeks, large animal practitioners across Nevada and Northern California started reaching out. By May, we were getting calls from livestock operations in Oregon, Idaho, and Utah. By August, an agricultural technology company called Regis Biotech reached out with an acquisition offer. They wanted to license our research. They wanted to commercialize the algorithm. They wanted to expand our team and turn our rural Nevada practice into a research and development hub. The offer was substantial. 7 figures substantial. I remember reading the email 4 times to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding it. Then I called my father. I told him about the offer. I told him about the research. I told him that a veterinary degree, the one he'd said wasn't a real career, had just opened a door that would change everything. There was silence on the line. Then my father said, "I need to tell you something." He told me that he had been wrong. Not just wrong about the money or the career prospects, but wrong about what he'd been protecting. He said he realized, listening to me talk about this work, that he hadn't been trying to steer me toward a better life. He'd been trying to steer me away from a different life. He'd been afraid. Afraid that if I chose something that mattered to me more than it mattered to him, I would outgrow him. That I would become someone he couldn't understand or relate to. So he tried to make me smaller. He'd made his doubt my doubt. He'd made his fear my obstacle. And he was sorry. He was so sorry. I didn't know what to say. For 18 years, I built my entire life around the absence of his approval. And suddenly, he was offering it. But here's what I realized in that moment. I didn't need it anymore. I had my grandmother's jade pendant on my desk. I had Dr. Okonkwo working beside me. I had a body of work that spoke for itself. I had animals I'd saved and families I'd helped. I didn't need my father to validate any of that. What I could do was accept his apology. What I could do was believe that people can change. What I could do was let him be part of this next chapter, even if he couldn't have been part of the ones before. I signed the deal with Regis Biotech on a Thursday. The contract was 40 pages long. My lawyer reviewed it. My accountant reviewed it. By Friday morning, it was official. The rural Nevada practice that my parents had considered beneath me was now a subsidiary research division of a $10 billion agricultural biotech company. The press release went live Monday morning. Rural Veterinarian's research transforms livestock disease detection. It was picked up by agricultural trade publications first, then mainstream business media. By Wednesday, my mother called. Not my father. My mother. Her voice sounded different than it had in years. Smaller somehow. She said she'd seen an article online. She said people from the church were calling asking about me. She said she wanted to know if I was okay, if the deal was real, if everything was happening the way the article said it was. I told her yes. She asked if she and my father could visit the practice. I said yes to that too. They drove up from California on a Saturday afternoon. My father looked older than I remembered. His hair had gone completely gray. My mother wore a new dress, something she probably bought specifically for this visit. I showed them around the clinic. I introduced them to Dr. Okonkwo. I showed them the research lab we'd set up in the back. I explained the algorithm in simple terms, the way you'd explain something to someone outside your field. My father asked detailed questions. He wanted to understand how the behavioral monitoring worked. He wanted to know about the market applications. He wanted to know if I was happy. That last question caught me off guard. I realized in that moment that he'd never asked me that before. Not once in 31 years had he asked if I was happy. I told him the truth. I said yes, I'm happy. Not because of the money, though the money is nice. Happy because I'm doing work that matters. Happy because I built this myself. Happy because I get to spend my days with animals and people who care about those animals. My father nodded. He looked at my mother. Then he did something I've never seen him do before. He cried, not dramatic sobbing, just tears running down his face while he stood in my clinic surrounded by the evidence of everything he told me was impossible. My mother put her hand on his arm. They stayed for 3 hours. We had lunch at a restaurant in Reno. We talked about my grandmother. My mother told me stories I'd never heard, about how my grandmother had wanted to be a teacher in Taiwan, but her family said it wasn't appropriate. About how she'd come to America and became a librarian instead, which was close to what she wanted. About how she'd always told my mother to make sure her children had the freedom to choose. My mother said she'd forgotten that over the years. She'd been so focused on safety and security that she'd mistaken her fear for wisdom. When they left on Sunday afternoon, my father hugged me. He held on for a long time. He said thank you. I didn't ask him what he was thanking me for. I think he was thanking me for not becoming bitter, for not using the deal as ammunition, for letting him apologize without making him grovel for forgiveness. 3 weeks after they visited, I made an announcement at the practice. I was establishing a scholarship fund for students from rural communities who wanted to pursue veterinary medicine. $100,000 seed funding administered through the UC Davis School of Veterinary Medicine. I named it after my grandmother, the Chen Family Rural Veterinary Scholarship. Within the first month, we had 20 applications. 17 of them were from students whose parents didn't believe in their dream. I read those applications, and I saw myself in every single one. The girl whose father thought she should become a pharmacist instead. The boy whose mother said animal medicine was a man's field, and he should do something more practical. The non-binary student whose family didn't support their career choice at all. I approved all 3 of them for the first round of funding. Dr. Okonkwo asked me if I was sure we could afford it. I said yes. I said this is the whole point. This is why the money matters. Not to prove my parents wrong, though that's nice, but to prove to someone else that they don't have to choose between their dreams and their family's approval. They can have both, or they can have their dreams alone if that's what it takes. 6 months into the Regis Biotech deal, I was invited to speak at the UC Davis Veterinary School commencement. 300 new veterinarians, their families in the audience. I stood at the podium and I looked out at them and I thought about the girl I'd been, the boy I'd been, before I understood that some people's love comes with conditions. I told them about my parents. I told them the hard truth, which is that the people who raise you don't always believe in you. Sometimes they're scared. Sometimes they're protecting themselves instead of you. Sometimes they're wrong. I told them that if they're lucky, those people will eventually apologize. But I told them not to wait for that apology to move forward. I told them that their lives are not a transaction where they earn their parents' approval through achievement. Your life is yours, I said. Build it anyway. Build it especially. Build it loudest when the people you love most are telling you it's impossible, because that's when you'll know for certain that what you're building is real. The applause started in the middle of my speech before I'd even finished. It built like something alive. Families crying. new graduates nodding. And in the third row, my parents sitting together, my father with his hand on my mother's, both of them clapping. I didn't look at them directly while I was speaking. I didn't need to. I'd already spent enough of my life trying to earn their belief. I was speaking to the people who needed to believe in themselves. That's what mattered. That's what still matters. My practice continues to grow. Dr. Okonkwo and I have 3 new research projects in development. The scholarship fund has expanded to 3 full awards per year. I've hired 2 additional veterinarians, and we're training interns from UC Davis. My father calls me once a week now. We talk about the research. We talk about the animals. He's learned the terminology. He understands what we're doing. It's not the relationship I would have chosen if I'd had the choice as a child, but it's the relationship we have now, and it's honest. My grandmother's jade pendant still sits on my desk. Sometimes I hold it the way I used to when I was younger, searching for permission. But I don't need permission anymore. What I have is proof. Proof that when you're brave enough to build your own life, other people's doubt doesn't matter. What matters is the work. What matters is showing up. What matters is becoming so undeniably real that eventually everyone else has to believe too.